Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. I think we're ready to go, so thank you for joining us for today's webinar, the Personalization Maturity Curve. Before I do introductions and hand over to Rusty, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping topics. Today's webinar is being recorded. We'll be able to share the link with you after the event is complete, and we welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with others. We also invite your comments and questions. There's a QA box on your screen. And if you should think of a question, type it in there and we'll try to answer as many as possible at the end of the webinar. We'll definitely endeavor to answer questions either today or as follow-up individually. Today's webinar is being presented by Boxever, a personalization platform that uses data and AI to make every customer interaction smarter. We work with great brands such as Emirates, Ryanair, and Allied Irish Banks to deliver a game-changing customer experience. My name is Ruadhán. I'm the Director of Consulting at Boxever, and I'm joined by Rusty Warner, Principal Analyst at Forrester. Rusty is an expert in his field. His research focuses on marketing technologies, including customer analytics, cross-channel campaign management, enterprise marketing platforms, real-time interaction management, and digital customer experience delivery. Rusty's going to take the first part of this webinar, and with that, I'm going to hand over to Rusty. So thank you very much, Rusty, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Ru. And thank you everyone for joining the webinar. We appreciate you giving us your time today. And as Ru mentioned, I'm going to take us through a bit of an introduction to personalization and some of what we see happening in the market in terms of trends, as well as what we see with customer expectations and what some leading brands are doing. And then Ru's going to take us through the personalization curve. And I think that it should be no surprise to anyone, because regardless of what we do in our day jobs, we are all consumers as well. We expect brands to do a better job of understanding us as individuals. And of course, that's easier said than done. If it were easy, I guess everyone would not be dialing into the webinar to learn more. But if you are a brand and you are responsible for commerce or marketing or digital activities at a brand, what's becoming more and more apparent is that you have to win in the moments that matter to your customers. And it comes down to those customer expectations more than anything else. What we are seeing is, of course, that those expectations continue to grow, whether it is because of our experiences with mega brands like Apple or Facebook or Google or Amazon. We continue to expect more and more from the brands. And anytime one of those mega brands provides something new or clever or leverages technology to make things easier to do business with them, we begin to expect that from the other brands with which we do business. Of course, at the same time, to make things even more difficult for you as a brand marketer or a commerce owner, the number of devices and touch points continue to proliferate, and a lot more data is coming your way. And you have to try to harness that data if you're going to serve those customers in a more personalized way. Unfortunately, what ends up happening in too many cases is we inadvertently put more load on the consumers. And I'd like to call your attention to that poor consumer who has that massive brain on his back in the lower left of this particular visual. Like I said, we sometimes have all of that data available, but we still put too much load on the customer in terms of that individual trying to figure out how best to do business with us, which channel they should use, how can they get the information they need, how can they solve a problem. And we ultimately need to do a better job leveraging the data to make that as easy and as seamless as we possibly can. It's critical because nearly 2/3 of consumers have told us that they're unlikely to return to a website when they get an unsatisfactory customer experience. But by contrast, for the organizations that get it right, more than 3/4 of consumers tell us that they would choose that brand over others, or they would recommend that brand to friends and family, or they would even pay more to a brand that is able to provide that better and more personalized level of experience or service. Of course, what brands have to keep in mind is that that experience has to occur again and again across the entire customer life cycle. I spend most of my time talking to marketers, and quite often marketers focus at the beginning of the customer life cycle, where they are focused on acquisition and making sure that they are available to consumers that are trying to discover the brand or explore the brand and compare options before making a decision. And then they hand the activities with that customer over to sales or service or someone responsible for CRM, and then get involved again as the life cycle starts to go around in terms of upsell or cross-sell when it's time to re-engage the customer. I firmly believe that marketing has a role to play across the customer life cycle in partnership and collaboration with sales and commerce and merchandising people at the buy phase, with customer services during the use and the ask phase of the customer life cycle, and then again working collaboratively with all the customer-facing functions when it comes to engagement with that customer. And we see that this is growing in terms of the focus and attention it gets from brands. When we interview brands across the US and Europe, we find that growing revenue, no surprise, is still the number one objective or the number one business priority, but improving the experience of customers is coming in at a very close second. And we continue to see the numbers rise in terms of the organizations that are more focused on delivering customer experience, or some of the other elements of customer experience, like improving products and services or providing innovation that helps differentiate the brand in the marketplace. But despite all of those good efforts, we still find that a lot of organizations are not quite getting to where they need to be. Even though the vast majority of businesses tell us that they are personalizing customer experiences, and in retail in particular, many organizations tell us that they are personalizing in-store and offline experiences as well as digital experiences. But that's not carrying through to the consumers. As we can see here, only 5% of consumers say that their email is often timed with the needs that they might have from a particular brand, and less than half would say that the information they get is relevant to their interests or their tastes or the things that they are looking for the brand to deliver. And I think some of that is because the bad personalization techniques that they have in place equate to bad customer experience. Sometimes we find that brands are taking an approach that is just too superficial, where we know who you are, so we think that gives us the right to say "Dear Rusty" in every email, but not provide anything more meaningful than that. Or we know which segment you belong to, so that tells us which of our products we want to propose, but ultimately we're getting offers that are the same as every other customer in the email list. Or perhaps because we're able to capture someone's browsing behavior, we can retarget them. Sometimes after they've bought the product from us, we might send that retargeting message. Or we might do that with advertising, and we might duplicate that ad multiple times across devices. I was at a vendor event not long ago where the person doing the demo said, with our cross-channel identity resolution, we know when it's the same person using the phone or the tablet or the desktop or sitting in front of the TV. And so we can hit them up with the same ad on every device. Now, I'm thinking if that's the best you can do with identity resolution, you probably have a bit more work to do. And the same when it comes to giving people offers based on what others like them may have purchased, or what's trending, or what's hot today, or chasing somebody because you know based on their demographic information that they would be a great customer, and you're really determined to acquire them at any cost. And all of those things can ultimately turn off the customer. And that leads me to a few more detailed examples of what that might look like. For example, let's say that I buy a toaster, a fairly straightforward purchase, and along with that toaster, I decide to buy some nice wooden toaster tongs so that I don't burn my fingers. Well, there are 10 other people that bought a toaster, so I decide I should offer those 10 people the tongs as well. And guess what? 3 of them buy the toaster tongs. And what usually happens at that point is everyone in marketing and merchandising pat themselves on the back because we had an uplift of 3 more customers. But what we have to keep in mind is there were 7 customers who didn't buy the toaster tongs, who may have thought that those were completely the wrong product to put in front of them. And they were either looking at other products, which they didn't find, or there were other opportunities to give them something more relevant, but we missed that chance. So I would encourage you that if you are doing personalization based on segmentation, keep in mind that you may be delivering the wrong experience and the wrong recommendation to the majority of your customers. The same goes if you use my purchase of that toaster to determine what my customer life cycle is going to look like. A single product purchase may not be anywhere near the kind of customer that I will turn out to be or the way that I want to engage with the brand. It takes a lot more data points than simply that one transaction in order to understand that customer life cycle. So don't assume that knowing that one thing about a customer is going to give you everything you need to know to effectively serve that customer and better personalize the experiences. And then finally, I mentioned earlier that quite often we focus on superficial levels of personalization and then we tick the box. So I would be very careful about doing that. For example, here we see wishing the customer happy birthday or giving them a, hey, it's Friday kind of message. Chances are the customer knows it's Friday without hearing that from you. And also, while some people may appreciate the happy birthday message, a lot of people do not. Customers want you to understand their relationship with the brand and their needs, but that's a little bit different than knowing every single thing about that customer. And I think a lot of brands fall into the trap of wanting to know everything and then using that in a way that simply doesn't resonate with a lot of people. So I would say don't waste your time personalizing experiences where there's no real value to the customer and they can't, in a very tangible way, look at that interaction and see that there is a tangible value exchange. What I would encourage you to do instead is, instead of looking at knowing every detail about that customer, focus on customer understanding. Focus on what do I need to understand about that customer and his or her relationship with the brand to ensure that my brand strategy is able to deliver a brand experience that wins in that customer moment. That means you'll have to listen very closely to your customers, to both implicit and explicit feedback from those customers so that you can begin to anticipate their needs and lead in a way that has them coming back to you above and beyond your competitors in the market. You'll have to connect the dots across the functional areas inside the organization. And then obviously you'll continue to capture more and more information that lets you measure and calibrate so that you can continue to optimize this process and ensure that you're delivering these personalized experiences across the customer lifecycle. Now, that is tough. It's not easy to do this. It's going to involve a technology ecosystem. So as you begin to look at how to personalize experiences, you're going to need to ingest a great deal of data and then manage that data so that you have customer profiles that you can use in an appropriate way. In the category of customer understanding, you will apply analytics and testing and targeting so that you can begin to optimize what works with individuals. Your brand strategy will depend on a lot of planning and asset and content management and constant measurement so that you can understand performance and affect that calibration that I mentioned a minute ago. And then finally, you'll need to carry this through across all of the customer functions. Here we've listed marketing, advertising, and loyalty, but we could have also listed commerce and sales and service and all of the other customer-focused functions that you have across all of the different channels. So as you assemble this ecosystem, there will be different levels of requirements for the different ways that you'll reach out to the customers and the way that you'll approach your personalization strategy. And Ru is going to take that to the next level and explain some of the work that Boxever has done to understand that evolution and that maturity curve as you're looking to make these investments for personalization.
Thanks very much, Rusty. That's really helpful. And I think, as Rusty's pointed out, your customer is increasingly focused on experience. And as marketers, it's important to decide how to best respond to the wants of those customers. And to help with this, I'm going to present a view on how to frame the path using what we call the Personalization Maturity Curve. Before we look at the curve itself, it's useful to give some context on our understanding of what personalization looks like. We think personalization is at its best and most effective when it combines 4 core dimensions: the who, the what, the where, and the when. First, the who. Great personalization uses things like segmentation, but more importantly, one-to-one targeting to understand customers as individuals. The what. Choosing the next best action, offer, or conversation for an individual requires a blend of both customer and business understanding. For example, what promotion, what price, which product image to use, and the what has to fit the customer every time. The where. Using the right channel is critical. So do I flip an image on the homepage carousel? Do I create a personalized navigation bar? Do I send an email or a push notification? Make a call from the contact center? Retarget on Facebook? These are all viable options. And the when. So timing is everything. So show a customer, show a message now, or wait until the end of the current session, or maybe later today is better, or maybe tomorrow is even better. And underpinning the dimensions are what we call the personalization enablers. So customer data, business drivers, real-time data, decisioning and AI. These are what make personalization possible. First is customer data. So customer data is the starting point for great personalization. It needs to be sourced from systems of records, things like data warehouses, data lakes, single customer view, customer relationship management systems, loyalty systems, etc. Everywhere you know your customer data exists today. Business drivers allow current business context to be leveraged in personalization. Example might include things like inventory levels, pricing, or current risk factors associated to a credit application. Real-time data is where personalization really needs context, which by defining the needs is what's possible. So for us, real-time data is 150 milliseconds, but there are 2 types of business context. Customer context, so you need to be able to know what the customer is doing right now, and business context, so what is the inventory for this product right now. And lastly, artificial intelligence. AI is a critical component of personalization. Without it, scale is impossible. Experimenters, challengers, and leaders all make use of it. The differences come in the extent to which they have connected the data and other models within an organization's marketing technology infrastructure. Looking at all these dimensions and enablers behind great personalization at once can be quite overwhelming. So it's easy to look at the sheer scale of what you're trying to achieve and not know where to start. And that's why we're big believers in taking small, planned, bite-sized steps towards an end goal. And that's why we've created the Personalization Maturity Curve. The curve charts a path from taking your first experimental steps in the bottom right with experimenters to more sophisticated personalization as you move through the middle of the curve, which is the challengers, to achieving personalization leadership at the top right. We've used this to help our biggest customers develop long-term personalization planning and to achieve industry leadership. To scale the curve, you'll progressively add personalization dimensions into the mix, make better use of all the enablers, and gradually introduce more channels. The personalization curve is designed to help companies to do three things. The first is to provide a clear view of what steps to take, whether you're at the beginning of a journey or a personalization veteran. Second is to understand how to balance the most critical technology, operational strategy, teams, and people at each stage. An aim for a personalization North Star. So without being weighed down by the scale of transformation ahead, it's also worth recognizing where your North Star is. For some of our customers, point 3 or 4 are long-term goals. Not everyone needs to be or should aim for one-to-one omnichannel personalization if it's not right for their business. So what questions do companies need to ask themselves ahead of starting on the curve? Well, the first thing is to understand, am I a personalization experimenter, challenger, or leader? What am I missing from my stack? What investments do I need to make to improve? And how does my business need to change operationally? To make a start on answering some of those questions, let me take you through each business topology, the experimenters, the challengers, and the leaders in turn. So experimenters have usually dipped their toes into personalization, either on web or email, or possibly both. They've reached a plateau of personalization and mostly focus on the who. They have at least one enterprise data warehouse, but customer data is still siloed. And to progress to the next stage, they need to consider a solution which will enable them to join their customer data together to achieve a view, together with a view to activating it. Something like a CDP does this really well. And then where appropriate, they should consider testing out the use of real-time data to improve on the customer experience. On this slide, I'm showing you a reference marketing technology architecture. We've used the Forrester framework of systems of record, insight, and engagement to logically separate elements out of the architecture. Here you can see what we have classified as slow-moving data on the left, which is systems of record. These typically operate on batch and store important customer and business data. On the right, you can see systems of engagement. These are the channels or touch points the customer interacts with. These tend to contain fast-moving data, but mostly it's siloed as new channels have been added, leading to vendor overload or at least overlap. Experimenters tend to have data enterprise warehouses and customer engagement tools, but they lack the means to connect the systems on the left to the systems on the right. They also struggle to connect the systems on both sides to the other tools within their vertical. Experimenters tend to not have a strong CDP capability at the heart of their stack, meaning that data is slow and personalization is often disconnected. Next up is the challengers. Challengers have an ambitious personalization strategy and more advanced tech across a number of channels. Critically, they've also have added a CDP capability, which gives them a view of their customers across the relevant channels. They are now using data to connect channels and experiences. They should also be capturing real-time data to give them a deep understanding of their customers. To progress to the next stage, challengers need to consider adding additional decisioning capability. CDPs usually output segment or audience level data. And for true personalization, you need to go beyond this and get closer to one-to-one. Importantly, Challengers are also reviewing their internal structures to align them to the customer. It's common to see a customer or CX steering group, or maybe even a customer data steering group being created while people are in the challenger stage. Challengers have added the customer data platform, an important start for a system of insight. To get greater control of multi-channel customer data and distribute segments and insights consistently across the channels. Note that they're passing segments of customers to all channels equally, providing the systems of engagement with consistent customer classification data. This is a relatively typical marketing stack infrastructure for most of our customers when they start working with Boxever. And lastly is the leaders. So leaders have flipped the concept from, as Rusty mentioned, I have an offer, which segment can I give it to more of a view of the world, which is, I have a customer, what is the best offer for this customer? An offer in this context is any marketing message, not necessarily just a discount or a product. Leaders in this space understand that success is not just based on tools and tech, it is also about their company approaches, how their company approaches the customer. Things like prioritization, resourcing, and strategy is normally led from a central team. When making decisions about personalization, they use real-time data and context. Leaders are also investing in things like predictive modeling, deep data analytics, machine learning, and automating decisions and personalization where possible. These tools critically help them scale, especially in enterprise-level businesses. And what can they deliver? So the leaders are capable of connecting customer experiences across channels. They are considering next best action, conversion, or offers. They're exploring the use of operational data blended with customer data to provide best-in-class customer experience. And they are seeing improvements measured improvements in both performance and in Net Promoter Score or NPS. Here you can see the leaders have added that real-time decisioning capability alongside their customer data platform to deliver right time, right place, one-to-one interactions consistently across every channel. I wanted to get to the end of the webinar and provide some helpful advice if I could. So what can you do? So before you run off to buy more technology, it's probably worth considering the following. What is your customer strategy? Is it written down or shared somewhere within your organization? From the content that Rusty and myself have shared, are you clear on the path forward from a technology perspective? Do you have a clear gap in your marketing technology stack? Aim to be better tomorrow than you are today. So consistent small improvements are far better than big projects with big value and big effort estimates that can cripple an organization. And lastly, Conway's law states that organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures in these organizations. Effectively mean that the communication structures and the team structures within an organization tend to reflect themselves onto the customer. Marketing, operations, loyalty, e-commerce, all talking to the customer about slightly different things when the customer wants to have a brand experience. So it's worth considering what it would take to change this and provide a consistent brand experience for your customers, or at least recognize what the experience is today. So that's our personalization maturity curve. I think we have a couple of questions to go through. So I think the first one is this one's from Suzanne. So for Rusty, how do you recommend that organizations get started with more individualized personalization?
Well, assuming that the organization has taken that first step that you've just described, where they have discussed the customer strategy and understand as a business what is it that they need to do to better serve the customer. So assuming that they've done that as the first step, and then they're looking at some of the technology investments that they need to make, no surprise, based on what we just saw, I think the first step revolves around customer data management. I think you'll need to begin to take a more holistic look at customer data management so that it becomes a more unified, more centralized approach. It may not be a single platform. It may involve multiple platforms. It will certainly involve multiple people in the organization. As Ru showed in some of those architecture diagrams, you will have systems of record that come into play, and then systems of insight that may be under the domain control of a business function like marketing. So IT and marketing and other business functions need to collaborate to ensure that you take that more holistic approach to the customer data management and try to get that sorted out so that you can have a good foundation on which to build the personalization strategy. Of course, after you've gotten that started, or let's say you've already gotten to that point, I think Ru outlined some really good advice in terms of how do you then turn that up a notch or two? How do you start to add real-time data and streaming data and get more current with the data refreshes that you're able to turn in that customer data management infrastructure that you build, so that you can begin to be more responsive and you can indeed think about personalizing the experiences in those moments that matter to the customer.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Rusty. Second question, we've got two more questions. One is from Manosh. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Boxever, the curve talks about value. What does a business case look like for this? That's a really good question. I think we come across that quite a lot during our sales processes and with existing customers where they're looking for additional budgets. So I think there's probably a few places that I would point you towards. I think it's always important to have a business case, at a minimum, a hypothesis for what it is you're testing, but you should at least have a goal in mind. I think that's critical. We do have a couple of case studies on the website that are worth checking out, that have some numbers associated, both in performance and NPS from, I think, 2 or 3 customers. There's at least there's a few case studies on the website, so I definitely point you to those guys. If you're looking for a template for a business case, we do have a few templates in Boxever. So Manosh or anyone else who wants to reach out to us, I'm more than happy to share some of those and what they look like. And then actually, there's a Forrester report that it's a few years old at this stage, I think, but it was called something like customer experience revenue growth. I think that had some really good numbers of understanding what do the leaders expect to have in terms of growth rates in the future. So from the top of my head, I think it was a 17% growth in CAGR for leaders, and I think Forrester classified laggards as maybe a 3% growth. So I think that's what drives most of the conversation around personalization, is the value growth which can be derived from customer experience. So that's definitely worth a look-see as well. I think you can probably find that on Forrester. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, let me know. And Rusty, I think this last one is from you. It's from Frank. Does Rusty think that personalization has to come at the cost of privacy? Well, I'm glad you're answering that one, Rusty, rather than me.
Well, I think it's a really good question. Certainly, I get lots of calls from people that are concerned about privacy, both from a regulatory perspective as well as just from what could or should the brand do to ensure that it is taking the right approach with individual customers and not coming across as creepy where anyone is concerned. So I think it is really a top of mind question for a lot of organizations. And no, I don't think you have to sacrifice privacy and trust that you have spent literally years, in many cases, building up with your customers in order to do personalization and do it well. I think everyone does need to take a step back and look at the regulatory regulatory guidance. I think it's important for everyone to be familiar with the different aspects of GDPR, or if you're in the States, CCPA and other regulations that are in effect. Look at the different consent levels that are expected from a regulatory perspective. And then after you've done that, you use that as just a baseline. Obviously we have to make sure that we are compliant, and we should. I'm glad the legislation is there, because it gives us an imperative to look at these things more closely, and to ensure that is simply the baseline of what we do. And then above and beyond that, you can start to look at your customers and think about how to approach it in a way that makes sense to those different individuals. Some people will want a high degree of personalization, and they'll consent to that. Others will not. Some people will be more than willing to hand over lots of data if they think that will get a better experience for them. Others, even in view of perhaps receiving a better experience, will be a lot more hesitant to share that kind of information. So understanding that is going to be critical moving forward, but it doesn't make personalization impossible. I think if I had to summarize all of that, I would say if you can find a way to be completely obvious and open with customers about the data that you're collecting and why and how you are going to use it, and then if you can make playing that back to the customers in the experiences that you deliver as transparent as possible, you will start to make it easy and seamless for them to do business with you. You will also start to foster a level of trust in that they can see what they've shared and how it's been used in a way that's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, I have to agree with what Rusty's saying. I think it's often quite difficult, I think, if you're being an organization which is truly customer-led, then you should really ask what does the customer want? And when I ask myself that question, am I happy with the GDPR? As a customer, I'm pretty happy with the GDPR. But sometimes when it comes around to a marketing campaign, I'm less happy with GDPR. But I think if you're going to be customer-led, you have to think about what customers actually want. We've a few questions. I think I'm just going to take one more from Matt. So it was a question to both. Would you agree that most companies can do more with clickstream data to make better decisions based on the in-the-moment customer interactions with brands they trust? I think so. So I think as part of those architecture diagrams, which we'll share around afterwards, the real-time data is critical for the context and personalization. I think Rusty also mentioned those times when maybe if Rusty hadn't bought the toaster chases him around the internet for a while, or even he buys the toaster, but a batch system hasn't been updated and the batch toaster chases him around the website for a while, even though he's purchased it. So I think both clickstream data is very powerful if you can get your hands on it. There is obviously a scale question there, so it's worthwhile bearing that in mind. There's a few more questions I don't think we're going to get to today. So Gareth, Nessa, and Michael, I'm going to make sure we get back to you guys individually on your questions, if that's okay, just in the interest of time. And so that's it. Thanks for your time, and a special thanks to Rusty for taking the time to share his insights. If you'd like to know any more, we have a Personalization Maturity Curve e-guide, which you can get at our website or on the address on screen now. But if you have any additional questions, more than happy for you to contact us directly and reach out via Twitter or LinkedIn or email, or as a webinar participant, whatever channel takes your fancy, and we'll try to respond to you in the channel that you've contacted us. So thanks again for your time, and thank you to Rusty. And have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.